Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Pivot Experience podcast. My name is Alex Seal, and I've had the luxury of spending the last 20 years of my life working for one of the world's most caring brands. In that time, I've had the opportunity to learn a lot about leadership, and we've developed this podcast in order to help other leaders pivot into their next. On this podcast, we like to bring on guests who we believe will bring a ton of value and to help you on your journey of leadership. On this episode, we have a very special guest by the name of Brad McDonald. I had the opportunity of meeting Brad via LinkedIn, and we instantly had a connection. He was creating great content that I appreciated, and I think I was doing the same. So we were fortunate to have Brad on the podcast today as he talks about his journey and his mission on developing 1 million leaders. Let's grow. What's up and what's happening, TPE family? We're back with another episode of the Pivot Experience podcast, where our aim and goal is to help leaders pivot into their next. I've got a very special guest on the line today. I've got Brad McDonald. Now, here's the deal. I met Brad on LinkedIn after one of my other interviews, and we got in contact, and I've been watching what he's doing. Very consistent in the content that he delivers, very consistent in the messaging that he has, and I just had to have an opportunity to extend and have a conversation with him. I was very intrigued just about the way he thought about leadership, the way he approached leadership, and I thought that he would add a ton of value to the people who have opportunity to listen to this podcast week after week. Brad, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. Alex, thank you so much for having me here with you this afternoon.
Absolutely. So, for myself, selfishly, right, and for the audience, could you tell us who is Brad McDonald? What are your life experiences and what brought you up to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love that. Love the opportunity to share my story. So I'm originally from Chandler, Arizona, just right outside of Phoenix. And I got to um, grow up in this amazing environment. I had a great family, an older brother, two younger sisters here in right outside of Phoenix, and I got exposed to leadership like from a really early age. My parents were both pastors and kind of in this spiritual leadership role. And so from early childhood, I got exposed to a kind of behind the scenes look at leadership, organizational leadership, spiritual leadership, particularly for them, with that kind of behind the curtains or under the hood vantage point. And ended up kind of getting to my senior year in high school, and unfortunately, because of some circumstances, I was pretty lost as to what my purpose was and where I really wanted to go. And I think that that's relatively common, for a lot of people at that age of 18 in that big life transition. And I ended up through a series of circumstances landing at this institution called Impact 360, just outside of Atlanta, and it was founded by the daughter and son-in-law of Truett Cathy, who's the owner of a founder of Chick-fil-A. And so that experience changed my life. It was a leadership program designed for students transitioning from high school to college, and it gave me some verbiage and some frameworks and some experiences that kind of helped take everything that I experienced in my childhood and frame it up for me in a way that I could understand and process. And so that meant, exposure to a lot of reading and writing, exposure to some international travel. But one of the key experiences for me was that exposure to Chick-fil-A and to serve model leadership and understanding what does it mean to lead through serving others. Through those experiences, I ended up meeting my friend at the time, Becca, and now wife. We've been married now for 10 years this December. We've got three kids, JJ, Heidi, and Honora. And Honora is only a month old. So if you see these bags under my eyes, it's because there's been no sleep in this house since early May. And man, we're just having a lot of fun. I run a consultancy called Pattern Talent. Part of the work that we do there is the Daily Leader podcast, which is, kind of how you got more exposure to me through LinkedIn and social media. And man, I help leaders develop other leaders. That's my great passion in life. Every night I lay down and I ask myself, okay, did I develop a leader today? And when the answer to that question is yes, then I know, okay, I did it. I did what I was put on the earth to do. And when the answer is no, I have to evaluate, okay, well, how did I spend my time today? And was I an intentional steward of that time? And so, man, that's me. That's where I come from, and who my family is and what we're up to. But if you've got more specific questions, I'd love to share any other details that you're curious about.
No, I think you're speaking my language when you're talking about serve model leadership. I know that's something that Chick-fil-A still uses, something that I feel like has really given me, I think you said it very well, a framework to think about as it relates to your personal and professional lives. Because I think the serve model is applicable both ways. So definitely, I think we're going to have a great conversation if that's our common foundation
Yes.
of thought. I definitely think that we're gonna be tracking on the right path. And so, I guess my first question to you would be, how would you define leadership? I know you said that your purpose is to develop other leaders, but what would you define? How would you define leadership in your own words?
I love this question. This is a question that I ask my clients, that I ask the folks that I interview from time to time as well. And so I would start by saying this: that leadership is about leveraging relationships to accomplish results. And what makes leadership different from influence or serving others is that it's all oriented towards achieving a vision. So leveraging relationships to accomplish results that achieve a vision. That's what leadership is in its essence. Now, from my perspective, servant leadership is what I would call the best way to lead. And it's a way of leading that is others focused and that is sacrificial. It's a way of leading that it doesn't ask, what can you do for me as the leader, but what can I as the leader do for you? How do I enable you? How do I support you? And how do I clear the path of obstacles so that you can contribute at your highest value?
What Okay, so again, first off script question, right? And so I love the way you frame that in today's workplace. And I think this has been a hot topic of a conversation for the people that I've interacted with and maybe some of your clients, right? This is probably one of the most diverse workplaces that we've worked in as it relates to the generations that are present. What challenges have you seen newer or older leaders have in leveraging relationships to drive results? Like, and I know that might be a loaded question, but like, how do what things kind of bubble to the top for you in your consultancy and in your coaching when dealing with the older leader, the younger leader, as it relates to getting them to understand how to leverage their relationships? Because I'll add context to the question. I think I put myself in the bucket as an older leader, right? I'm approaching 40. I'm working with people who are 16, 17, 18. There's a disconnect there in interest, there's a disconnect in priorities. And so I find myself having the challenge of how do I connect? And then this happens every year. That individual gets a little bit older, they buy into what we're doing, but then there's another crop of people coming right behind them that we have to do the same thing with. What challenges have you seen, and what ways have you felt like you've helped people work through those challenges?
That's such a good question. And I understand the tension here, right? The tension between being too broad and general, to the point that we're saying nothing, or so specific that it can't be actually tested out over the course of, a generation, right? But I'll just tell you from my own experience. I'll even leverage some of my previous employers, um, because I think that there's a lot to share there embedded in an organization as a leader, and then I'll share some from my client work within my consultancy. And so, in my previous employment experience, I had a role where I was the youngest person on the leadership team, and everyone who reported to me was older than me. And that was a really, really humbling experience, which I think is probably one of the key tenets of great leadership, right? This idea that I see myself rightly, not that I have an inflated view of myself or a really self deprecating view, but that I see myself for what I truly authentically am. And I think anytime we're working with people and we're leading people who are more experienced than us, it's humbling, right? It's humbling because they actually have more data points than we do. And we have to be able to acknowledge that in effort to respect and honor their perspective. And so, in in that experience, one of the biggest things that I learned was that for the older generation, acknowledging and recognizing them for what they have sacrificed to achieve the things that they achieved is very important. So if you're a young leader and you're entering into a relationship with an older leader who maybe you supervise or you have some sort of formal authority over, one of the most important things that you can do is just ask them to tell you their story and to get honestly around a cup of coffee at a table and say like, hey, tell me about what you learned when you were my age and in my seat. What were you doing? The oldest gentleman that I led at that time was about 70 years old, and getting him to talk and share his stories and validating those experiences and celebrating them, and having the humility to recognize that, you know what, he's been in the workforce as long as I've been alive, right? That's the kind of relationship where if you can build that trust right early on, when I would come back around at the end of every month and ask him to, walk me through his P&L and to tell me about some management decisions or some issues that were in his business, there was a lot of credibility there, right? Because it wasn't from a perspective of, I don't value you or recognize you for who you are and what you've done. It's coming from a perspective of help me understand why this is the way it is, because I know there must be a good reason if it's a decision that you made. And so I would say that's number one, and that deals with the older audience. I think with the younger audience, there's such a massive emphasis placed on relationships and placed on kindness and being nice and kind of that, like, how you make me feel question. They're so hypersensitive to how they are made to feel in situations that as leaders, we have to be very careful to scratch that itch in a way that's healthy and sustainable, but also kind of pull away and demand clear results that we hold people accountable for. And so to me, great leadership with younger people really deals with a lot of care and encouragement, but then also introducing a high standard that we hold people to and figuring out, okay, how can I show care? How can I show genuine encouragement, but also achieve this standard? Because we know, especially in a QSR environment, for example, which we both have a lot of exposure to, the competitiveness of that experience is ever increasing, right? Whether it's, you know, order accuracy or taste of food or cleanliness of the restaurant environment, just as an example, those are standards that are not going away. They're not changing and they're not going to lower. And so we have to be able to use that, 16-year-old, up to early college student, early career professional who has very little experience and very little wisdom, frankly, to be able to achieve those kinds of standards.
No, I love the way you address that question. I appreciate your answer. I think when you spoke to the older generation, showing some level of reverence is important. Showing some level of respect for what was done, even though I think a lot of times, particularly not so much now in our organization, but maybe 10 years ago when we had someone who was working where the volume was so different from 10 years previous
Sure.
to up until that point. I think it's easy as a young leader to kind of disregard what that individual is. I mean, quite honestly, I was named general manager at 21 years old. The majority of the people who I had to work with were older than me, and I think one of the things that
Sure.
I never really framed it like this, but I think one of the things that really helped me get through what I was doing was I had a high level of respect for those individuals. Like I had a high level of respect for hey, I know what you did. I watched, you guys, and I guess the crazy part about it is I had the opportunity to kind of grow up with these individuals, and then my operator put me in a position to where I was above those from an authority standpoint, right, over those individuals. And so I wholeheartedly agree with that. Showing them the respect, and then they will in turn respect you, and you're killing it with the younger generation is hyper focused on how they make you feel. Like, there used to be a phrase that said, and this still a phrase is still relevant. People don't remember what you say; they remember how you make you feel. And I feel like that's the theme of the younger
Yes.
generation for sure. And just
Agreed.
making sure you acknowledge that. But I love the fact that you're kind of standing in the fact that we still need to drive results. I think that's sometimes where we get so concerned with not hurting someone else's feelings, we negate the fact that we actually still got a job to do. We still got a business to run. We still got metrics that we need to hit. Taste, cleanliness, just the environment, order, accuracy. That doesn't change. You kind of get me fired up a little bit because you're exactly right. Because no matter, we might bring in seasonal things, and I know the workforce might change. They might let us wear beards now, and some cosmetic pieces might change, but the core things are still the core things. And so, man, no,
That's right.
that's really, really, really good, man. So, how would you frame? I know you said that you leverage relationships to drive results, but what would you call your leadership style? Like, apart from when you're coaching someone, but when you're operating in your organization or organizations that you held management positions in before, leadership positions before, what is the word or the set of words that you would name your leadership style as?
Yeah, that's really good. Well, I tend to leverage coaching tactics in my leadership because I do believe that question asking, which is one of the primary functions of coaching, is one of the absolute best ways to get people thinking for themselves and making decisions in that follower or maybe otherwise developer context, right? So when I'm the leader and I've got the formal authority, right, over a certain set of decisions or area of responsibility, and I've got the influence over someone that I have that formal authority with, I want to try to coach them up to see things and understand things and make decisions at the level that I am. And so question asking is probably one of the absolute best ways to do that. Next, I would say developing leaders who can bear the weight and the responsibility of large projects, large areas of work is really important to me too. So I want to do coaching, but I want to use that coaching to move to a place of delegation. And delegating isn't just about tasks, right? But it's about how much responsibility can this person handle, and what risk tolerance do I have as the leader to see them fail at this particular piece of work, as they learn and grow into it. And so I want to try to take those big, delegating leadership risks, but I want to come alongside them and try to provide a safety net as they learn how to do new things, think new thoughts, have new interesting perspectives that maybe have never occurred to them before. And then obviously, that all leads to making new decisions and having different forms of authority over areas of work, tasks, responsibilities, projects, other people, etc. So I
Uh,
would say coaching and delegating.
Yeah, so it sounds like to me that you've got to be a great listener in all of this, right? You have to be able to actively listen and hear what people are saying and what they're not saying. I know you used the phrase risk tolerance, but I'm going to maybe rephrase that and say your willingness to let people fail in endeavor of getting better.
That's
There's a
right.
conversation that me and the coaching team has been having about just failure, and I don't want to say I don't like failure. I know we fail every day at something, right? But we try to pursue excellence. I think the phrase that or the quote that stays in my mind that they said that Truett would say, "Perfection is the expectation, but I'll tolerate excellence," right?
Yeah.
But with newer generations in particular, that's not the mindset. So we've got to create a little bit more wiggle room, a little bit more grace to allow them to be able to learn from their mistakes or learn from their findings. It might not be a mistake, it might be the next best thing. So just getting out of our own way to be able to allow that. And I love the fact that you said safety net. I like to think of the term guardrails. You act as the guardrails for them, so they don't get out of bounds, from a brand standpoint, from a overall mission and value standpoint. So no, very good, very good. So what are some of the like common challenges that you see facing leaders in today's workplace? I know we already talked about some of the multi-generational components that exist currently, but what are some other things that you see that happen in the workplace that could act as a deterrent or act as a roadblock for leaders to develop?
I love this question. I think without a doubt, I mean, without even really having to reflect very much, the first thing that comes to mind is focus and prioritization. We all know that we live in an incredibly distracted world. And each of us on any given day at any given time, is pulled into these different competing priorities. And so for business leaders, I think setting uh, and consistently maintaining priorities over long periods of time is our number one challenge. And in work that I'm doing with my clients in particular, I find that that's where most of them need help that they don't know they need. They don't know that their vision, mission, purpose, I mean, many of them have that locked in, or at least they have, 60 to 80% of it relatively fuzzy, but it's there. Very few of them have the skill to translate that big vision into, a 3 to 5 year strategy, and then to back that into, an annual business calendar, and then to back that into, a quarterly map, and then to back that into biweekly, accountability and coaching conversations with the people who are actually executing the work. And so what happens all too often is that we kind of bounce from campaign to campaign, new book, new conference, new podcast, new thing. And we really zigzag a lot more than we need to, when we oftentimes, if we're just more disciplined and we're more focused on our clear priorities, we can make a beeline to those things. But we have to be able to get them on the calendar. And so, really, without even thinking, I can tell you, it's focus and prioritization. But I would tell you there's probably one other major one that gets kind of broken up into two buckets that I see right now, and it would be communication. And I think that it's broken up into kind of two major challenges. One is just this post-COVID, asynchronous communication environment, working remote, in the office, out of the office, traveling here, traveling there. It's difficult to get people together in the same room. And we just know the data shows us that, man, the virtual thing is awesome, but it's not the same. And so those ties that we would normally feel pre 2020, and the way that we would be intentionally kind of mapping out schedules and rhythms together in person is gone. And I think that's really difficult. I think that if you're an executive leader in any environment right now, you're trying to figure out how to build your team in a cohesive way to where that team can do more together than it can do apart. Man, you're having a hard time keeping everyone together right now. And then the second part of that, Alex, I would say deals with conflict. And 60 to 75% of what I do on any given day is helping clients, number one, just even express some of their frustrations around conflicts they're having in their work environment. And then number two, it's getting them to actually role play and sandbox some of the verbiage that they need to practice in order to express it successfully with one of their colleagues. And so people are not skilled at conflict, and even fewer people are naturally gifted in that area. So I would say focus and prioritization, and then communication being both. How do we keep and get everybody together? And then how do we have healthy and really helpful conflict that actually makes the relationship better and helps us advance our mission more effectively.
Yeah, definitely, and we're definitely living in a post-COVID TikTok-driven society, and not to blame TikTok here. I know everything has its purpose and function, but I think it's really broken down our ability to sustain focus on one particular thing, or having to. I love the word that you use, the discipline, to be able to just zone in on what's the plan, what's the vision, what's the mission, and how we go about doing it. Dan Cathy always he would say, and I don't know if they say it anymore, but you marry the vision, you flirt with the methods. And you're focused enough to stay on the vision, but just exercising the different methods. And I think sometimes we confuse that with flirting with the vision, and then flirting with the methods too. And there's no commitment to
Yeah.
one particular thing. And we talk about communication being the oxygen to execution. I think everything that we do, if it's going to be done well, successful, rides on our ability to be able to communicate to our peers. I look at them as the horizontal and vertical relationships that exist in our lives, right? The people who we are on equal footing going left to right, our superiors, and the people who report to us. And I think, those are things that, particularly when things went digital, and I think you said it very well, like the texture of our conversation has changed, the level of care and intentionality, the verbiage, to your point, it has changed to where I think we've lost some level to be able to be effective in communication across the board. So hopefully we're starting to regain some of that vernacular that drives results, as I think a lot of things are have normalized in a sense, but there's still a lot of virtual things happening in the corporate world and in different workspaces. But definitely, I would have to agree. Focus and communication. I love how you answered that question. Thank you so much for that, Brad. How do you pursue personal development? I mean, I see behind you a library of books, so I'm assuming reading has to be one. But how do you keep the blade sharp as a leader?
I appreciate that question because if you're familiar with Clifton StrengthsFinders, learner and input are in my top five. So to me, to live is to learn, right? To be alive every day is just another test. It's another practice run, and and I would say the number way that I have found learning to be just an everyday part of life is just trying new things. So when you want to learn something, one of the best things you can do is just go try it. Don't read the instruction manual, don't go get that next book, don't watch that seminar, just go pick up that thing and just start doing it. I really like coffee. It's 4 p.m. my time where I'm at and I'm having a cup of decaf coffee. I don't It's not even for the caffeine, I just like coffee, right? And so a couple years back, man, I got really into coffee and I went and I bought a Chemex and I got the filters and I got the grinder and I got the gooseneck, kettle, and I got the scale and I started learning how to dial in the best cup of coffee that I could make at home. And recently I went and I bought a putter and a couple golf balls, and back here in my carpet when I'm on a call and or in between things, I need to reset my mind. I'm gonna I'm gonna hit a couple balls and just give myself a minute to reset. And and so I would say, even if it's the small things in life, like how to make a cup of coffee or how to hit a golf ball, like you just kind of got to pick it up and try. And I would tell you, like I'm applying the same thing to my business enterprise. I knew that I love to sit across the screen or the table from leaders like you and have in-depth conversations, that I'm this insatiably curious person who just wants to get to know you and wants to understand how you're doing it every day as you go about your leadership. And so I started a podcast, and I had no clue what I was doing and just said, we're doing it. Let's just turn on the camera and sit down here and we'll figure it out. Right. And did that with a close friend and business partner of mine. And so I think we got to try new things. And someone said this to me once, and I think it's kind of one of the phrases that I live by now. A mentor of mine named Brandon Schaefer, he said, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly, right? Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. And our hyper achievement oriented society has a really hard time with that, right? Like there are certain people who look at me and they're like, well, Brad doesn't have a doctorate in, psychology. He doesn't have an MBA, from a prestigious university. Like what business does he have being a coach, right? Or a consultant? He didn't work for a, big five consultancy. Like, you know, what does he know? Right? There are people who are going to look in and they're going to have such a high standard of excellence. They're going to spend their whole life, practicing and never actually going and playing the game. And I would say, get out there and play the game, right? And don't let your ego get in the way of you actually making that attempt. Just go do something poorly, but do it and allow that, poor performance to drive your learning and your growth. Allow the pain of really being bad at something to incentivize and motivate you to improve rather than, a more ego driven approach, which says, like, I've got to know it all first before I can even go do it. I've got to make sure that I can't fail before I go try. Um, but then I would tell you, on the other hand, like, yeah, I mean, I'm a book a week kind of guy. Like, I think in the last month I've probably done 3 or 4 books already. It's the 17th. Whether that's audiobooks, whether that's reading in here, in the margins of my day. On top of that, there's going to be some podcasts and YouTube videos that I just, insatiably kind of in the margins of my day, I'm Googling something and I'm watching a video on it, or I'm curious about an author, so I'm going and I'm, using one of my Audible credits and I'm ripping through that book. And I found too, for me, when it comes to audiobooks, like 2 times, 2.5 times really is the sweet spot for me. It's about as fast as you and I are talking right now to listen to an audiobook at that pace. And, on a walk or a run, it really holds my attention. And so that's a little trick too that I've implemented to get, broader exposure. And I'm listening to an audiobook right now that it's probably the third time that I've gone through it, but it's just, I'm that way too. There's going to be certain things that I really want to hone in on and dive deep on. And this particular audiobooks is all about interpersonal conflict and how to tease out and have collaborative conversations with people. So that's me, and that's my pursuit of personal development.
Man, no. So if I was to attempt to unpack all of that, like I feel like one of the most, I guess, a ground shaking or groundbreaking. I don't. You may not feel like it like that, but I love what your mentor told you in regards to something worth doing is worth doing it poorly. Poorly, is that, if I'm am I saying that
That's
right?
right.
And I
Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly.
and I think that really encapsulates the experience of when you first try to go do something. I'm sure when your first putt wasn't the best. I know for sure attempting to do this, like my first time recording the podcast, man, let me tell you, I bought mics, I tried to get lighting. I just felt like I, to your point, just try to buy everything you think you need to make it perfect. And you'll come to realize is that, perfection, at least in these terms, is kind of, is never ending. There's always a better mic, there's always better lights, there's always better software that you can upgrade to, and you just got to get out there and do it. Like uh, I, I,
Sure.
I've truly believe, had I not gotten the reps in that I've gotten now, it wouldn't have brought me to the point to engage in conversation with you to take this step. You know what I mean? And so I like the way that your mentor phrased that. And I think you said something too that really jumped off the page to me, and I feel like a lot of leaders fall in the trap of, like, and I know you just said you are a book a week type of individual, but I think the people who are a book a week type of folks and they don't do anything with the information that they're consuming, they're just consuming, and not applying the information. Like, I think that's where I think that's a trick and a trap too. Like, hey, I listen to podcasts every
Totally.
day, but like, how is that translating into your leadership? What results are you seeing in your personal life? And so, for anybody out there listening to this podcast, try to find something to implement after the conversation that you listen to or after the teaching, because I'm going to say this, I feel like Brad has given us a bunch so far. I mean, we're not quite done, but he's given us a lot to where there's at least one thing I believe that you can implement into your leadership. Just don't listen to this podcast just to check the box. Listen to this podcast to try to help yourself get a little bit better. And so I'm going to forego the
Yeah.
next question, because I think I understand between Impact 360 and between servant model leadership. I understand what role leadership has played in your life and how it's impacted your journey so far. But I guess the big question is like, what's next for you? So I understand that you're working the consultancy. You've got the podcast. What does the next iteration or the next advancement for Brad McDonald look like?
I appreciate the question. I think that, you know, I I've set on a course with Pattern Talent and the Daily Leader along with that to develop 1 million leaders. And I remember sitting across from my business partner Taylor, and I told him, I want to develop 100,000 leaders. And he was like, "That's interesting. Like, why 100,000?" And so we started talking about that number and what that number meant to me and why it mattered so much to me. And he's like, Brad, I kind of feel like if you can develop 100,000 leaders, you could probably develop 1 million leaders. And I like kind of dropped my fork. We were sitting having some breakfast and thought about that. And I kept thinking about that over the course of the following weeks, leading into some changes I had made in my career. And I I realized that he was right. That the number at some point becomes arbitrary, but the pursuit and building the systems and the processes to hit that number is what really matters. That's the sense of calling. That's the sense of purpose. Is like, if I could build the infrastructure and the ecosystem to develop 1 million emerging leaders, like I think I could get to the other side of this life and feel like my life was purposeful and it was used well. Like I was a faithful steward of everything I'd been entrusted with. And so that's the journey that I'm on right now, is how do I build the ecosystem that can contain and can invest in and can steward, the development of 1 million different leaders all across the globe. And that I feel like is going to be a lifetime's journey for me. Even teasing out, what does that look like? What do I call a win, and what do I call a fail? What do I say, as a model versus, just a good thing that we did. And so I'm on the pursuit of really scaling Pattern Talent and understanding how we're going to tackle that 1 million leader number. And then I would say, you know, in my free time, I'm really thinking about buying a small business, and I'm doing due diligence on a couple different businesses right now to try to figure out what that first small business acquisition is going to be, because I really feel like, with all the experience that I've had, small business ownership creates this very, very unique environment that is a very just rich training ground for myself, for my family, and some close friends. Where when you own a small business and you're responsible for everything, and then there's limited cash and there's limited customers and there's tensions and agreements, and those experiences and those challenges can do so much to enrich a family's influence, a family's impact on a neighborhood or an environment. And so I really think, especially for my children, to be able to expose them to a family owned small business could be something that I want to endeavor towards. And so that's how I'd answer that question. I know I'm going to scale Pattern, and I know I'm going to buy a small business for me and my family to kind of tinker with. So
Man, I love both those answers. So I don't know where you're at in the 1 million, but you can definitely add one to it, because whether that's, I know we don't have a direct relationship in terms of the consultancy, but I definitely have been indirectly, and now in this interview been directly impacted by your leadership and your perspective. So I want to say thank you so much for that, and I just love the mindset that you have about the small business. That's really smart. Actually, that's kind of one of the drivers for myself and my wife to be in business. Yeah, of course we're going to reap the benefits of it in real time, but the long term play for our family to get more exposure, to get more involved and engaged, I definitely think that that's huge as well. So man, you've given us so much today, Brad. I appreciate your time today. audience. I hope you guys appreciate Brad's transparency and the way he thinks about leadership, what his definition of leadership is, and what the foundation in which his leadership rests. If you guys are out there to our Chick-fil-A peeps, he said a bunch of Chick-fil-A stuff. I didn't really acknowledge it, but he really hit on some core things, really just ending us with the corporate purpose in a sense. And I just love that you're echoing a lot of things that resonate with myself, and I'm sure a lot of people that's going to be listening to this. If Brad, if they want to connect with you, how do they reach you? How do they contact you?
Yeah, thanks for that opportunity. The best place to find me right now is probably on LinkedIn. That's where I do most of my kind of thought. LinkedIn for me is just this kind of open leadership journal, right? Of the interviews that I'm doing with people on the podcast, some of the things that I'm thinking behind the scenes, and then the next thing would just be patterntalent.co is kind of the website of the consultancy where people can reach out if they're interested in working together. But man, I want to point people, back to you and the work that you're doing as well, Alex. I think that irregardless of, where you're at in your life and what you're doing, the answer is always to get some help and some guidance, right? We're better together. We're better when we're in community. We're better when we're interdependent by choice, right? Not by necessity, but by choice. And so I want to point people back to TPE, back to the work that you're doing, and if there's any way that I can serve you or your clients or your audience, I would always love to participate and to come alongside and support. So, man, I'm grateful to you. This has been a lot of fun, and next it's going to be your turn to come on the Daily Leader, and my co-host and I will interview you and get to know you more and get to share you with our audience. So thank you, and thank you to your listeners.
Man, appreciate it. So there you guys have it. Another episode of the Pivot Experience podcast comes to a close. Thank you again, Brad. And until next time, TPE family, peace.
Tap into the Pivot Experience where we help young, hungry entrepreneurs move on to the next step.